between research and the researcher biography. I will provide you a few general information before we start this session. So we will have two presentations followed by a question and answer session. The presentation will be recorded, but not the questions. So you will find this recording later on the EuMIGS YouTube channel. We will ask you to keep your microphone muted during the presentation, but turn the video on if possible. And then if you have questions, please raise your hand during the Q&A session in the end of each presentation. We are a bit unsure of who has access to the chat and who has not, so please raise your hand during the Q&A session so we are sure that we answer to the questions of everyone. So now I will give the floor to Leonie, who will introduce you the first speaker of today, which is Alessandra Polidori.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you also, Alessandra Polidori, for being our first guest speaker for today. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to you, and then you can start your presentation. So Alessandra Polidori is a researcher at the Swiss Forum for the Study of Migration and Population at the SFM, which is at the University of Neuchâtel. She's also a researcher at the NCCR on the Move, the National Center of Competence and Research, who's also in Neuchâtel. And she's additionally an associated researcher at the LAP, the Laboratory of Political Anthropology at the EuMIGS in Paris. She's currently working on a project on equity in maternity care for vulnerable groups. And her research interests include mobility, youth studies, and reflexivity in the social sciences, but also the different ways of communicating science outside the university. So in line with today's topic, she's going to talk about the relationship and bond between researcher and their research object. And I thank you so much for being here and give the floor to you, Alessandra.
So thank you very much, Leonie and Odd, for this very long and kind presentation. And thank you, Jeremy, for organizing this very interesting seminary that I enjoy all the academic year because it was made up with very, very important and useful teach all along. And before starting, I owe you two apologies. The first one is because I maybe ruin your weekend by giving you a text of Bourdieu, which is a very difficult author sometimes to read. So I'm sure that among you there are someone who are familiar with this author, but for those who are not, it's a difficult author to read. It's an author who is not recent, so it's normal if something is rested unsolved or if you have question about it. So feel free to ask every question. No one can be considered a stupid question because it's actually an author that can be a strong first that can have a strong first impact. So I hope I didn't ruin your weekend, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture. And the second apology is because I didn't prepare any slide for today's presentation because I wanted to do it more as a dialogue between us and more as a the possibility to open up a space to talk about our personal experience in the research field. So I didn't want to give a frontal lecture. So what I'm trying to do is to make a little bit of contextualization of the text, try to explain what this author wanted to tell us, and made a practical example that stems from my PhD field work on student mobility. And then open the floor to you and your questions. So to start with, the text that I proposed for this class started with the idea that social science are not considered as the other science. So they are kind of peculiar science. Why? Because it's a science which is very embedded in the relativism. It's a science that is very subjected to relativism. Why Bourdieu felt the need to explicit that? Because when social science started their pathway, they had to compete with science that were considered way more objective, way more strong, and way more structured, which was not the case of social science, because social science deal with something which is the human behavior, human environment, which deal with something which is human. So it's normal that we cannot have a result which is black and white. We cannot have a methodology which is black and white. In social science, we have different graduation of gray that has to do with human environment, human behavior, human emotion. So the situation is way more relative. And at the beginning, when social science need to affirm the scientific status, that was something that wasn't well seen from scientists that were used to an approach, a method, a pathway who were more strict. But this need for objectivity, slowly by slowly, became a recognition when social science started to be included among the real science and enter in the academic field. They started to be this need for objectivity started to become a recognition about the importance of the relativism and the fact that the relativism that the social science bring can be a value, an added value, because the fact of being capable to change methodology, to use different methods, to see different nuances of the society that we're seeing is a value that helps us to better interpret what we're seeing and the reality we're interested into. But this idea of relativism should be set between some milestones, should be kept on track to avoid that this relativism become excessive and became something that is an obstacle to the scientific goal of the social science and also to the objectivization of the social reality. So this need of objectivization that Bourdieu is talking about stems from this idea of keep the social science relative and able to include the different nuances of the social science, but at the same time to make sure that there is an objectivization of the social reality that we are going to analyze. Why? Because the dynamic of the portion of the reality that we want to study is conditioned by the rest of the reality, the research position. So the object of the social science and the researcher in the social science is an object that is co-constructed by the sociologist, by the field worker where he or she is embedded, by the academical framework, so by a lot of different aspects that has an impact on the object of research. So the social fact and the object in general are socially constructed. And the goal of a process of self-reflexivity is to reveal this co-construction process. So the need of objectivization of the subject of objectivization, and that is quite tricky to understand, but I think it's a very beautiful expression, seems to the idea of revealing anything that can have an impact on the reality that we want to study. And that's because the portion, when we do social research, we're interested in study a portion of this reality. And this portion of reality is of course, described within a more broader reality. It's like a puzzle. We are interested in looking at one piece, but this piece assumes significance only among the whole picture of the puzzle, and not only among the whole picture of the puzzle, but also on the specific position, on the reality, on the relationship it has with the other part, on the relationship that this pieces of puzzle has on the other part which are next to him, because otherwise he couldn't fit. But also it is impacted by what the person who put the piece of puzzle thinks, believes from the past history of this person. So what Bourdieu wants to bring to light is this idea that every topic in social science is co-constructed within dynamics that plays a role within the fieldwork. And this is particularly important in the migration studies. I don't know if you're familiar with, but there is someone who I guess want to enter in the within the waiting room, and I don't know how to let him in. I'm trying, but it's still saying that it's in waiting room. So I don't know if you can do it.
Yeah, I've been trying to, but I don't know. Something must be happening with his connection. That, yeah, I keep admitting him, but I don't know. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm sorry for
I'm
humor.
sorry for the interruption. Yeah.
No problem. Okay. So why is it important? Because migration fieldwork is a fieldwork who is really embedded in a political and also in struggles, social struggles, and also because it deals with some topics and some methods which are particularly sensitive. I was saying that a few years ago, an article went out. I don't know if you're familiar with. It was 2016, and it was an article by Janine Hinden, where she talks about this idea of demigranticize the migration fieldwork. And what she meant is not that we have to stop talking about migration, or that we don't have to talk about that in different terms, or we don't have to deal with that. What she meant is that the concept that we use, the topic that we use, the methodology, the position, are embedded in a social fieldwork, a political fieldwork, are embedded in a lot of different contexts that has an impact on the way those some concepts are created, constructed, and on their meaning. And these concepts that we are using can bring with them symbolic violence or significance that we don't want maybe to put into play. So we have to be aware of what we're using and why some concept we're using in some ways or in another ways, and also what are the processes that are behind those kind of concepts. So when we're using the concept of refugee or asylum seeker, we have to be aware that it's not just a word, it's not just a category, it's a category that has a specific meaning if we're using in Italy, in France, in Swiss, or if you're using in academical environment, if we're using in a ONG environment or into a non-profit organization. So the concept has some meaning and some dynamics and some violence and some sensibility, some emotion that change in the place that we use this concept. And we have to be aware of that. We have to go behind the concept and see what is behind, who constructed, who used this concept. Some years ago, Ulrich Beck said that class is a zombie categories. And a lot of people felt say no, but what was he saying? It's we still need the concept of class. We have to use it. It's not a dead concept. It's not a zombie categories. But what Beck meant is not that we cannot use the concept of class anymore. Is that the concept of class is a kind of empty shell, because what we mean nowadays in 2024 with class is not what class meant when it was first conceptualized. It's not the same meaning that Marx gives to the concept of class. And at the same time, the concept of class is also linked to personal history of the researcher. So the position of class he or she has, the different relationship based on class that he or she has. So when we use this concept, we need to consider them not as an empty shells, but as something who has really important meanings, who brings important significance and a set of maybe emotion, maybe ideas, maybe concept, maybe bias that we have to be aware of. So another point to me that is important to bring on is the fact that in migration studies, it's difficult that the research is neutral, because sometimes persons who are interested, it is a topic which is very, very sensitive. And also sometimes it stems from a desire to better understand, from some political struggle, some values that can be, again, political, that can be ethical, that can be personal, that can have to do with our personal history, personal experience, past lives. So it's a field work which is really sensitive, and where people who are inside choose to dedicate as something where they really believe, and sometimes also because it has to do with personal history and also personal struggles. And this can be a value, again, this can be something that can be more helpful for the field work. And on the example that I will bring at the end, you will see how it was helpful for me. But at the same time, he can be tricky, because maybe some values, some struggle can prevent us to see some part of the reality that we tend to hide, we're not so comfortable with, we don't really understand. And this can happen in every step of the research. So we will be, in approaching the fieldwork, we will be led to talk with someone that maybe we don't want to talk and we don't like. It's far from our political opinion. But we still have to make sure that we give this person the same space that we give to the other, that the interview or the focus group or whatever with this person will be following the same procedure that with someone who is maybe more aligned to our beliefs and idea and so on. And at the same time, when we will face the results, maybe we can find out something that we don't like. And we have to be honest, and we have to bring it on. And even if it's deny our hypothesis. And these have to struggle with our personal values sometimes. So what we can do to be objective, so there is hope on that, and that's what Bourdieu says. The idea is to reveal our point of view. So the more we are objective, the more we objectify and we explicit and we talk about our position, our objective, our interest, the more we are objective, and we do a favor to the person who are going to read our work, whether they are academics or not. The more we say about the reason behind the research and the reason behind our positionality, will give tools and instruments for the people who are going to read, because they knew better which lenses using in approaching our research to understand better what we wanted to say. Because whether the sociologists want or not, we are an actor in the struggle that we want to describe, and that should be clear and should be put into light. Let's see what is not a reflexive approach, an auto-analysis, as Bourdieu called. It's not a narcissistic exercise, so we don't have to do that because we want to say what we have done, our past life, our experience. The goal is not to say we've done this, this, and this, I believe in this, this, and this. No, it's not a narcissistic exercise. It's not even a psychological session. Why? Because the goal is not to feel better ourselves. The goal is not the benefit for ourselves. It's the good. It's a good outcome for the research itself. So, okay, the secondary effect will be that we will feel better, of course. So it's something that will have a good effect on us too. But we have to think that we do this self-reflexivity exercise for the well-being of the research, not for our personal well-being. And to go on the practice part, how we can do a good reflexive, auto-reflexive analysis. Well, in the past, like anthropology used to write diaries at the end of their research, where they say the well-called tale confession of the fieldwork, where they describe some funny fact happened on the field, some emotion, something that they want to narrate about when they went to the fieldwork. And that's a good point to say, I went to the fieldwork, I done this, and this, and that happened, this other thing was interesting, these other things was not, I was tired, and so on. And this is something that it's nice and help the person who is going to read, and is also pleasant to have this kind of readings at the end of a very, I don't know, maybe dense scientific work. But it's not sufficient. The process that Bourdieu suggests us to do is all along the process of research. So what he suggests us is to ask continuously questions to ourselves about the position within the fieldwork. And I don't know if you notice, but when I talk, I constantly move between some personal sphere to more broader sphere. So you have to imagine as concentric circle when you start to think about yourself, your personal values, history, past lives, and so on, then to move to the field you're within to. In my case, it's the academic fieldwork, or maybe some organization, or maybe some association fieldwork, and then to the more broader, like the society. And if you notice, I didn't come up with that. It was Bourdieu itself that if you wrote the sketch from his auto-analysis, he started to talk about when he was young, when he was a child that he went to school, the history of his father. He didn't say much about his mother, but the position of his father, his jobs, how this conditioned the enter in the lycée, and then he moves toward this fieldwork because he came from sociology and from philosophy, then he moved to sociology. So what does it mean that in the academic fieldwork, what was the struggle, how people interact with him as a philosopher, and so on, and then to the society in more general. So we have to constantly ask ourselves questions on that, on these three levels, which can be also 2000 level. It's like from the narrowest to the broader, about every step of our research. So why I choose this topic, what I want to say about this topic, why I choose this director, this supervisor, why not this other one, why I choose this particular context, why I choose this country, why I choose this language, why I choose this hypothesis and not the other one. And then on the methodology, why interview this person, why not this other one, why I don't want to go to talk with this person, why this interview was 30 minutes and the other one was 1 hour, why on this one I was very attentive to what the person says and in the other one I wasn't. And in the interpretation of the result, and this is very important, why I interpreted that way and not the other one. And also on the reading, why I choose this book and not the other one. Did I really didn't have time? Did I have time and I didn't want? So constantly ask about these questions about our practice as a sociologist. And to conclude, when I was doing my PhD, I studied the Erasmus mobility, which you're familiar with. Is like a period of study abroad that you can do. And it was quite difficult for me because I was a student on mobility too. I was like almost the same age of the person that I interview. I was around, I don't know, maybe 26, and the person that I interview were around 20 up to 25. So we have more or less the same age. I was doing interview in Paris, and I'm not from Paris, so I was there as a student in mobility. And so I experimented on myself. I was very, very close to the fieldwork. And I also wanted to believe that, for my hypothesis was that Erasmus is not like a Goliardic or amusement time. That people don't go to Erasmus to just have fun or to spend just a period abroad, but they go there in order to make an experience which is going to be useful during to find a job in a context of crisis, because people from some countries, especially in the north, south of Europe, like Spain, Portugal, and Italy, doesn't have the same opportunities as other young persons. So the Erasmus is a cheap way, because you get a scholarship, to go to another country and do a period abroad if you don't have the tools to do it. As a student told me once, and I think it's a very resume of my PhD thesis, if I could, I wouldn't gone to Sciences Po directly, but since my family can't pay for Sciences Po, I've done an Erasmus in Sciences Po, so that was more or less the goal. And why I was so interested in that hypothesis, because for me Erasmus was the same thing. Erasmus kind of changed my life, because I was sure that I was going to work in the small city in Italy where I was born. There was no opportunity to do research. There was not sociology at the university where I was. There was no possibility to become a researcher. Then I want to do an Erasmus. I went to do an Erasmus in Paris, and I find out that there were good opportunity to stay. So to me, it changed my life, and I really wanted to say that on my PhD thesis. So I have constantly to ask myself why I interviewed this one and not this other one. Because when I started to interview someone, maybe someone says, no, but I went to Erasmus because I want to have fun. No, but I went to Erasmus because like my boyfriend were living there. So I went there too because, I don't know, so I can stay closer to him. And that was something that was against my thesis, because they didn't do an Erasmus because they want to improve their condition or escape to a context of crisis. They want to do an Erasmus to have fun. And so I realized at the beginning that I was very conditioned by that. So this interview were like 20 minutes. And when I met someone who say, yeah, I come from a really poor family and I couldn't go away to study, and Erasmus give me this scholarship. So to me, it's a kind of a miracle, because now I can study at Sorbonne in Paris. Wow, tell me more, please. I want to take. And there was like interview that lasts like 2 hours. So I have always to be reflexive and think about, okay, maybe even if these go against the hypothesis that I used to enter in the field, I should consider that, because there is this part of the reality and also another part which I don't like, but it's there and I cannot deny it because it's not scientific. And also at the same time, to be on the same level of the person sometimes was tricky, because the interview became like chatting with my peer, because it was like, I don't know, maybe we met into a bar and both of us were looking at, I don't know, the cheaper things on the menu. And I was like, you too, you're a student in mobility, so you know what does it mean. And I realized that was a good thing to create confidentiality with the person, that were willing to tell me more because he felt empathy between us. But at the same time, it was dangerous, because then they started to go in every sense and not be, let's say, to tell me maybe their life, and not to go to answer the question I need, and at the same time to consider me as a friend and no more as a researcher. And the dynamic became very nuanced and difficult to understand. So we have to be aware also on that, because in my case, there wasn't violence in the dynamic, but in migration research, sometimes it can be. So we should be careful even on that, to not impose a dynamic of violence with the people we are interviewing, because of linguistic, because of cultural capital, because every kind of difference, because of our position. And also to take into account that it's true that it's our topic, and it's a topic that we know more than others. The topic that we choose is something that we care, is something that we wanted to, is something that we believe on, but we have to be aware of make space to things that go against that, and things that deny what we're saying, and things that deny also our position in the field, that delegitimize us, and that make us lose credibility. And we have to take all of this into account and explicit that, confronted ourselves with a blank page where we wrote everything, keep a diary on that, and to keep in mind that this is not something that we're doing for our own personal well-being, which will be, but also for the well-being of our research that will be delivered to a public with a kind of book of instruction for our readers in order to understand better what we want to say, why we wanted to say, and how we wanted to say. So I think I will end up here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Does anyone has questions at this stage?